In the autumn of 1911, a dredging outfit was working the Ohio below Maysville, cutting the navigation channel down to project depth. The work was routine. The bucket took sand and gravel off the bottom and swung it into a scow, better than 40 lifts an hour, all day. On the fourth day, the bucket came up heavy and did not dump. The operator, a man named Elias Pryor, who had worked 11 seasons on the river, stopped the winch and brought the bucket in against the rail. Lying in the gravel was wood. Not a snag, not a flood-carried log with its roots and bark still on it. A stake. About 4 feet long, 3 inches through, cut to a point at one end, and not cut with a saw, and not cut with a flat-bladed axe. The taper had been taken off in short facets, each about a finger wide, worked around the circumference the way a pencil is sharpened with a pocket knife. The wood was black, soft on the outside and dense within, and it smelled of river and peat. 9 more came up in the bucket that day, 14 the next. Some were broken across, some came up whole, and several still had short lengths of what looked like woven brush jammed against them in the gravel, all of them from a stretch of channel about 200 feet long. Pryor entered in the dredge log that the material at that station contained sunken timber and noted the delay. The district inspector came out 2 days later, looked at 4 stakes that had been left on the deck, and directed that excavation continue, recording in his report that no obstruction to navigation had been found. There is nothing in the report about the stakes standing. They were standing. Pryor said afterward that he could feel it in the bucket, that the wood did not come up lying flat and tangled the way drift does, but vertical, in ranks, and that the bucket was shearing it off at the level of the bottom, the way a scythe takes grass. The sounding for that station that year was 41 feet, and the reach was being taken down another 6. The work ran another 9 days, the reach was cut to grade, and the outfit moved on. The 4 stakes left on deck dried out over the season, split, and went over the side with the rest of the trash when the outfit was laid up for the winter. Not one was measured, drawn, or kept. 3 things came out of it: a page in a dredge log recording sunken timber and a 9-day delay, an inspector's report stating that no obstruction was found, and a man who said for the rest of his life that they had run a bucket through something that had been put there by hand, that it stood in rows across the current, and that in 9 days there was nothing left of it at all. The account rests on a riverman, and rivermen of that period are worth understanding, because their credibility is specific and limited in specific ways. A dredge crew was not a survey party. It was a production outfit paid against a schedule, working a reach of channel that had to be at project depth by a stated date, with a scow to fill and a tow waiting. The operator was the man in the house at the controls, and his entire skill was reading the bottom he could not see, through the feel of the bucket and the sound of the machinery. He knew the difference between gravel and hardpan by the way the winch loaded, and he knew it in the dark, in fog, and in a current that moved the whole outfit on its spuds. He knew when he was into clay, when he was into a snag field, when the bucket had found something that was not going to give. That was not intuition. It was 11 seasons of it, and the outfit's schedule depended on him being right. What such a man was not equipped to do was identify an artifact, argue with an inspector, or write anything into a log beyond what the log was for, which was the record of production and delay. The second thing is the reporting chain. A federal improvement project of that period ran on a simple principle. Obstructions were removed and the channel was cut to grade. There was no category in the paperwork for anything else. A dredge operator who reported that the bottom contained something old had no form to put it on and no office to send it to. and the practical effect of insisting would have been a stopped outfit, a foreman's telephone call, and a man's name attached to a delay he could not justify on paper. So he wrote sunken timber, which was true, and the inspector wrote no obstruction, which was also true, and the reach was cut to grade. What neither of them wrote down is the one detail that decides the whole thing, and Pryor described it clearly enough that it can be checked against what is known about how wood is worked. The detail is the facets. A stake sharpened with a modern steel axe or hatchet takes a small number of long, flat, clean cuts, because a steel edge is thin, hard, and takes a deep bite. The resulting point looks planed. A stake sharpened with a stone adze or a stone celt does not look like that. A stone edge is thicker and blunter and cannot bite as deep, so the work is done in many short strokes, each removing a narrow chip, and the finished taper is covered in small facets running around the circumference, giving it the appearance of something whittled rather than cut. The difference is visible to the eye, and it is measurable with a rule. It is not subtle, and it is not disputed. It is the standard means by which archaeologists distinguish stone tool woodworking from metal tool woodworking on waterlogged sites all over the world, from Neolithic trackways in English peat to lake dwellings in the Alps, and it survives on the wood as long as the wood survives, because the facets are the surface itself. Pryor, who had no reason to know any of this and no vocabulary for it, described short facets a finger wide worked around the point, and compared it to a pencil sharpened with a knife. That is an accurate description of a stone-worked stake given by a man who had never seen one and did not know there was such a category of object. It is the single most persuasive element of the entire account, and it is also the element that no report, no drawing, and no surviving specimen can now confirm, because the 4 stakes on deck went into the river. Which leaves the other question the account raises, and it is the one most people ask first. How could wood survive at all, under a river, for any length of time worth talking about? Wood on land does not last. It is attacked by fungi, by insects, and by the wet and dry cycling that splits it, and in a temperate climate, an untreated stake in the ground is gone in a few decades. Wood under water is a completely different case. Below the water table, buried in fine sediment, the environment is anaerobic. There is effectively no free oxygen, and the organisms that break wood down cannot operate. Under those conditions, wood does not decay in any ordinary sense. It waterlogs, it darkens, it softens on the outside as its cell structure fills with water, and it can hold its shape, its grain, and its worked surfaces for thousands of years. Lift it out and let it dry, and it will shrink, split, and destroy itself within a season, which is precisely what happened to the 4 stakes on the deck. This is not a marginal effect. It is the reason the entire discipline of wetland archaeology exists, and it is why almost everything known about prehistoric woodworking, basketry, cordage, and boat building comes from a small number of waterlogged sites, while the vast majority of dry sites preserve nothing but stone and bone. It is also why dugout canoes keep coming out of rivers and lakes across North America, hauled up by dredges, exposed by drought, found by divers, some of them thousands of years old, with adze marks and the char of fire hollowing still legible on the inside of the hull. The Ohio bottom, 40 feet down under sand and gravel, is exactly the environment in which worked wood survives, and nothing else does. Which means the material Pryor was pulling up is not implausible in the slightest. The only real question is what a 200-foot line of sharpened stakes standing vertically in ranks across the current was for. They are a fishweir, It is one of the oldest pieces of engineering in the human record. It is found on every inhabited continent, and it works on a principle that has not changed. Fish moving in a river follow the current. A barrier of stakes driven into the bottom, with brush or wattle woven between them, does not stop the water, but does stop the fish. And the barrier is built at an angle or in a V, so that everything moving downstream is funneled steadily toward one gap. At the gap sits a trap or a woven basket, or simply a man with a spear or a dip net. Nothing about it requires metal, draft animals, or a boat. Once it is built, it works continuously, in the dark, without supervision, and during a run it takes fish in quantities that no amount of individual fishing can approach. Enough to dry, enough to store, enough to carry a group through a winter. That is the important part. A weir is not a tool for feeding a family for an evening. It is infrastructure for feeding a population, and it implies everything that goes with infrastructure: a group large enough to build it, an agreement about who owns the catch, an understanding of the seasonal runs, and a reason to come back to the same stretch of river year after year to repair it. Because a weir has to be maintained, or it washes out. Across North America, weirs were built of stone where stone was to hand, and of wood where wood was. And in the great river valleys, where the current is heavy and the bottom is soft, they were built of stakes driven in ranks. A 200-foot line of stakes standing in ranks across the Ohio is not a mystery in need of an exotic explanation. It is the most ordinary explanation available. And there is a case where exactly this was found, in an American city, and where it was documented properly, because the people who found it happened to be standing in the right place at the right time. In 1913, 2 years after the Ohio work, excavation for construction in the Back Bay district of Boston cut down through the made ground on which that part of the city is built. Back Bay is filled land. The ground under it was tidal flat, buried in the 19th century when the city extended itself into the water. More than 30 feet below street level, the crews came into the old flats, and in the old flats were stakes, thousands of them, over an area measured in acres. Sharpened wooden stakes driven into what had been the tidal bottom, preserved by the same anaerobic conditions that preserve wood in a river, standing where they had been put. The site is the Boylston Street fishweir. It has been investigated repeatedly since. It has been dated by radiocarbon to roughly 5,000 years ago, and it is not controversial in any respect. It is a prehistoric fishing structure of enormous extent, in the middle of a modern American city, found by construction crews 30 feet down. Nor is it alone. In Maine, a weir of wooden stakes in Sebasticook Lake was found when the water was drawn down, and it too dates back thousands of years. None of this proves anything whatsoever about what Elias Pryor pulled out of the Ohio in 1911, and nothing about that account is established. The wood is gone, and the record consists of 2 documents that describe almost nothing. What the Boston case establishes is narrower and harder to argue with. Structures exactly like the one Pryor described exist. They are of the age he could not have guessed at. They survive in precisely the conditions he was working in, and the only reliable way anyone has ever found one is that somebody was digging for another reason entirely, which raises the question of how much digging for other reasons has been done on the Ohio. The answer is that the Ohio River as it existed for the whole of human occupation no longer exists. Through the 19th and 20th centuries, the river was systematically rebuilt for navigation. Channels were dredged and redredged to progressively greater project depths. Snags and bars were removed. Then came the dams, first a long series of movable wicket dams, dozens of them, built to hold a navigable depth in low water, and later the large modern structures that replaced them. And with the dams came pools. A dammed river is not a river with a dam in it. It is a staircase of slack water pools, each one drowning the shoals, riffles, gravel bars, and shallow crossings that the free-flowing river had. Those shallows are precisely where a weir can be built, because a weir requires water shallow enough to drive stakes into and fast enough to move fish through. Every one of them on the Ohio was either cut away by dredging or submerged under pool, and in most reaches both happened, in that order. This is not a suppressed history. It is the recorded engineering history of the river, and it was carried out by an agency doing exactly what it was created and funded to do, at a time when there was no legal requirement to survey what was about to be removed, and no institution that would have paid for it if there had been. The material that came up in the buckets went into scows and was dumped as spoil. The material that did not come up went under 20 feet of pool. Whatever was in the shallows of that river before 1800 has been dredged, drowned, or both, and almost none of it was ever looked at by anyone whose job it was to look, which is why the record of the 1911 reach comes down to a handful of people who tried, at long intervals, to find out what had been in it. 4 are known. In 1931, a river engineer named Arthur Kessler, compiling a consolidated record of channel work on the Middle Ohio, came across the 1911 dredge log with its 9-day delay and its entry for sunken timber, and wrote to the district office asking whether any material from that station had been retained or described. He was told that spoil from channel work was not retained and that the inspector's report was the complete record. Kessler noted the exchange in a marginal annotation on his own compilation, which survives. His compilation is still in the district's holdings. He retired in 1949 and died in 1961, and no one appears to have read the annotation since he wrote it. In 1954, an archaeologist named Ruth Lindstrom, then surveying Ohio Valley sites ahead of reservoir construction, was given Pryor's account second-hand by a man who had crewed with him, and wrote to 2 federal offices asking whether wooden material recovered during channel improvement was ever inventoried. Both replied that it was not. Lindstrom's own project was a salvage survey working against a rising pool with a fixed deadline. She recorded what she could reach and did not follow the river work further. She published on the mound sites and nothing on the channel. She died in 1989. In 1978, an archivist named Vera Dolan, processing engineering records at a regional depository, catalogued the 1911 dredge logs and flagged the timber entry in her descriptive note as of possible interest. Her note is still in the finding aid, 1 line long, using the phrase the log itself uses. According to the depository's request log, the volume has been produced twice in 48 years, and in 2003 a retired towboat pilot named Wendell Pryor, a grandson of the operator, wrote asking whether the reach below Maysville had ever been surveyed archaeologically before dredging. He received a reply explaining that modern projects include cultural resource review under federal law, which is true, and which does not apply retroactively to work completed in 1911. He died in 2016. What is known is 2 documents and a family account. A dredge log page recording sunken timber at a station and a delay of 9 days. An inspector's report stating that no obstruction to navigation was found. A marginal annotation made in 1931 by an engineer who asked and was told there was nothing to retain. A descriptive note written in 1978 and produced twice since. What is not known is everything else. Nobody knows how long the line of stakes ran, or how many rows there were, or how they were set, or whether brush was still woven between them under the gravel, or how old the wood was, and nobody can now find out because the wood was cut off at the bottom by a bucket, dumped into a scow, and spread as spoil somewhere along a river that has since been dredged again and drowned under pool. 4 stakes lay on the deck of a dredge for one season and were thrown overboard when the outfit was laid up. Elias Pryor worked the river another 16 years, went to the towboats when the dredging outfits mechanized, and died in 1934. He never claimed to know who had built it or when. He described short facets a finger wide around a sharpened point, which is what stone-worked wood looks like in a place where wood survives for thousands of years, in the shape of a structure that human beings have built in rivers for at least as long as that. Under Boston, 30 feet down, thousands of the same stakes are still standing where they were driven, and they are only known about because a construction crew happened to dig deep enough in the right block. The Ohio was never dug for any reason but depth. There is no site to go back to, no specimen to examine, and no one left to ask. There is only a 9-day gap in a production log, and the fact that whatever caused it was cut to grade and carried away by men who were paid to do exactly that, on a schedule, correctly, with no form on which to write down what they were removing,